Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of It's Not All Rainbows. I'm your host, Lindsay Goodman. I'm a certified trauma recovery coach, and I'm also a survivor of abuse in a queer relationship. I'm here to help validate and support those who are or have been in my shoes and to help spread awareness of what these kinds of relationships can look like. Today, I'm going to talk to you about power dynamics in relationships. Obviously, I'll be focusing on abusive relationships, although obviously power dynamics and power struggles can happen in any relationship, um, unfortunately. Before we do that, I will dive into my struggles and successes. A struggle is that I'm working a lot lately. I'm picking up any amount of work that I can fit in my schedule, which means less time with my son, and I'm freaking exhausted. But I'm building up to our third annual extended trip with my son. Um, so I'm very excited about that. So I'm just in this kind of like got to keep my eye on the prize type thing where again I'm like ready to quit my job, which I'm not going to do. But if you're used to working a certain amount, which I am, and then you're like all of a sudden doing so much more and you're unable to like juggle things because you're whatever, but you have a certain goal in mind, it's like just remember that goal. It's worth it. It's temporary. I couldn't work the way that I'm working now for too long. Like it would run me into the ground. And so I'm just in this kind of weird funk. But by the time you listen to this, I will be done with this and I will be on my trip with my son and it will all have been worth it. It was just a piece of seaweed. If you are on the podcast, I was having a little moment. So I will dive right in. I don't have a lot of time today because I'm at work, I'm in my car, I'm on my break. But I wanted to go ahead and fit this one in because this has been something that I've been talking about a little bit on my TikTok lately, and it's also been on YouTube, where people are talking about power dynamics in terms of how, an abusive person can, well, to be honest, it all started with like, there was an abusive person or a problematic person who was outed on TikTok for having like 509 women that they were trying to date and stuff like that. It's like this whole scandal in the lesbian community, blah, blah, blah. By the time you're listening to this, you either have no idea what I'm talking about or it's been way past. But the question was like, people were saying like that the person was less attractive than the people that this person was going after. And they're like, how does this happen? Like, how does that person, and I'm not really a looks person because I dated someone who was super attractive and they were horrible to me. Um, but a lot of people are like, how does that person get all of those people? Like, how is this possible? So I talk about how is that possible? And one of the things that contributes to that is a power dynamic. And so one of the first things that I want to talk about is that social media can definitely be used to draw in potential victims, we'll say. And if you're coming in with a large following and you're targeting people who maybe have a smaller following, you kind of have the upper hand there. A lot of times with power dynamics, we think of people again having a position of power in terms of like their career. They have a better career. Maybe they're a police officer, a doctor, a lawyer, like someone that we think of like in society as maybe they're a politician, right? Um, they've got this power job, um, or they're wealthy. They are more established in the community than you are. They just like are wiser, smarter, again, more financially stable, whatever that looks like. It seems obvious because it's like, oh, you're coming into this relationship with that person who has X, Y, and Z, and you don't have any of those things. There's a power dynamic, or a power imbalance. Um, for example, financially, when I met my ex-husband, my son's dad, he was very financially stable and I was not. So immediately there's a power imbalance there because it's kind of like he's like, I'm just gonna say it because I felt like this a lot. Like he's the dad, like he's the smart one in the relationship, he's the wise one, he's better off. So you need to kind of like listen and learn because like he's whatever. Whether that person is abusive or not, whether it's like something that's talked about or not, there's just like this feeling when you're in that situation. That was just an example, um, but a very good one because one of the things I'll go ahead and talk about some of the things that I felt in terms of the power imbalance with my abuser because my abuser did not have a better career than me. They did not make more money than me. They did not have really a lot of like they barely worked, so they didn't have a job or like a position in the community that everyone was looking at them like they were this amazing person, or that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is cool. But what can happen is that like the person's demeanor compared with your demeanor can alone be a power imbalance. So if you have someone who's coming in thinking that they're attractive, that they're a catch, that they're, X, Y, and Z, and you're coming in like being like, yeah, I don't know, like, I don't know how they picked me. Like, I feel so grateful because I didn't expect to date someone who was so attractive or so this or so that. There's a power imbalance there. And they'll use it. An abusive person will use it to their advantage because they know that you're feeling like you are less than. And so in my relationship, I felt like my abuser was more attractive than me. I know they felt like they were more attractive than me, more desirable than me. They had had more female partners, we're queer, so they had had like, they'd been out forever, they had more experience, all that stuff. And I was just this little baby gay, like, yeah, I'm older than they are, so it's like that I had that against me, quote unquote, because they had like youth and freedom and experience and all of this stuff. And that's another thing about like the youth and freedom, was that I was coming into the relationship with a child and an ex-husband who's like some baggage if you're an a-hole and don't understand that some people like to co-parent and get along and not have it be that way. But there was just a lot of very clearly like, Lindsay, you are subpar, I'm gonna date you anyway. But like they never are like, yeah, you're subpar, so maybe I shouldn't date you. They're like, you're subpar, whether they're saying it outright that like, this is the way of it and you should be thankful. And a lot of them do. A lot of them will say, you should be grateful that I'm here with your son. And, I never want to be a parent. And here I am. Mine did that a lot. I never wanted to date someone whose ex was still around. I never wanted this, that, I was single. Now I'm not free to do blah, blah, blah. My abuser very outwardly made me feel guilty and less than for a lot of those things. So those are all things that can contribute to a power imbalance. Um, and those are things that as a society are harder to spot because again, we have, age, um, age in like a way that it's like you're wiser, right? So I don't, maybe I shouldn't say it out loud. The actor from Titanic, who is a certain age, an advanced age, who likes to date, quite younger people, there's a mega power balance there, let alone the fact that he is very wealthy. She probably isn't. He is famous, very well known, cherished by a lot of people for his acting skills. This person's like a rando who's like 19, right? I don't know. That's just something that I saw recently, but very obvious. Like society can look at this and be like, although some people will argue that too. I did see people arguing that, but society will look at that and be like, whoa, there's a mega power imbalance there. But there are a lot of things, like I just told you, that are very subtle that a lot of people wouldn't recognize as power imbalances, let alone, sorry, from the outside looking in, let alone people who are in it. I did not realize that those were power imbalance, like, factors until like recently when I started talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, there's a lot that goes into power imbalances. Um, It can also, of course, be the demeanor of the person in the sense of like how they behave. So obviously when there's an abusive relationship, right off the bat, you're starting with manipulation because love bombing is manipulation. And typically you're not love bombing back. I know there are some people who they'll argue about it and they'll say, oh, I have ADHD, or oh, I have this and it makes me love bomb and things like that. But I don't remember ever love bombing this person back. I just remember being like, this is the pace. Okay, I will roll with you on it. But it wasn't like they were love bombing me and I was love bombing them back. It was just like, okay, it's typically with love bombing, your senses are so overwhelmed by what they're doing that you're just like, okay, like this is what we're doing. Here we go. That's very much how I felt. Um, but they're starting off with this manipulation, and it's a yummy, delicious, feel good manipulation tactic. But either way, they're already ahead of you in terms of the progression of the relationship and how it's going to happen. And also, talk about a power imbalance is quite often, and I've talked about this before several episodes ago, they already have planned their first move and they know that they're going to pursue you. They kind of have an idea of how, all of that stuff. Some people would probably argue with me that they don't do that, but I'm trying to find the episode so you can look back on that. Um, but they're ahead of you in their mind. They're like, that's the person I'm going to go for. Looks like this is going to be a good quote unquote fit for me. Like this person's probably easily manipulated or whatever. I'm going to do that. And you're caught off guard because you're like, oh, I never expected this to happen. I thought this was fate. I've talked about this before where yeah, their first move was probably calculated as the episode from February 8th. So I talk about that a lot. That's a mega power imbalance because, again, they're already ahead of you. They already know what they want to happen in the relationship, and you're just following along like, okay, okay, okay. But then more diving into the manipulation thing, their behavior towards you pretty early on starts to be controlling. Mine was already isolating me from people 2 days in, guilt tripping me, controlling my behavior, testing how I would respond to this and that. Very early on, they were manipulative. So they're calling the shots, they're pulling the strings, and I'm doing this little dance trying to figure out how to make them happy and things like that. That is a massive power imbalance. So, all of that to say, I want to just sort of educate and validate those who have been in those situations and maybe didn't realize that there was a lot of power imbalance and power dynamics happening there. Um, and just to also educate on what this can look like. So if you've never been in this situation and you happen to listen to my podcast for your own education so you can help others, maybe you work in a field where there's a lot of women who are vulnerable and at risk for this type of person to come along, and so you want to know about abuse and red flags and things like that. I really, really want to help drive this home because, again, this can be really hard to spot. And I think it's really important for ourselves and as a society to be able to understand that these power imbalances are very important tools for abusive people. And we can't help it that we are the way we are. We can't help that, our attachment or our childhood trauma set us up to be vulnerable for these kinds of imbalances. Like, again, I came into that relationship self-conscious. I was a mom. My body was different than it was. I was still breastfeeding. I was tired. I was not expecting anybody to like me or be attracted to me. I was very vulnerable and I just didn't love myself in the way that I do now and appreciate myself, my body, my personality, my brain, all of those things. My self-talk was very different then versus what it is now. And so it happened. And so it's very important to be aware of, our own pain and ways that another person could come along and use those parts of us against us, and to know what it looks like when someone else is coming in and possibly doing that, right? So this looks like it's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode because I feel like I said what I needed to say about power imbalances, and also I do have to get back to work. But sometimes short and sweet is where it's at. We all have busy days and busy lives, and I always appreciate you listening, whether it's 12 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. Before I go, I want to remind you again, I am a certified trauma recovery coach. This is what I do. I offer one-on-one coaching. I have 30 and 60-minute sessions as well as 6-week packages if you want to work with me. I do a lot of working with people who are still in abusive relationships. We do education and validation, and we come up with plans to get out. And I even do post-leaving support. I also work with people who have left abusive relationships and they're just trying to start over and trying to figure out who they are in the grand scheme of things, because starting over is wild. And there's so much that I can work with people on. I do most obviously talk about, narcissistic abuse, coercive control, in relationships. I like to offer my services, especially to the LGBTQ community, because I am a part of that community. But anybody who is struggling with something, if you're struggling with something and you feel like that could be helpful, please don't hesitate to reach out, send me a message, ask me, tell me what you're dealing with, and we'll try to see if I'm a good fit for you. If not, I might be able to recommend another coach or a resource for you. So you can find all that information on thelindsaygoodman.com and click on the coaching tab. You will also find the information for the LGBTQ plus support group that I host one Saturday a month with my friend Trey De La Torre. We're both survivors of abuse in our first queer relationship. And we love having this support group and being able to offer a support that we both wish we had when we were leaving our abusers. What else? If you like this episode, if you like this, whether you're on YouTube or you're listening on the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe. I really want to get this into the ears of the people who need this the most, and your interactions really help to get it out there. I so appreciate you, and I read every single review that I get on the podcast. So thank you so much. Again, I know your time is valuable, and I appreciate you being here with me. For now, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, but I will be back with more. Remember, take care of yourself, do something nice for yourself today, and go drink some water. See you all next week.